Hello, my friends. Today is a very special day. I've got a book for you here. I'd like to say it's a new book, but it's only new because it's the first time that I'm sharing it. It's a book called Very Young Verses by A. Milne, and it was printed a long time ago in the series Methuen Modern Classics. You can see that this is a very well used book, a very well thumbed book, and I will explain why. This book was my mother's. And there she is, Phyllis Ann Harris, from 35 Edwinstowe Drive, Sherwood, Nottingham. And the NGHS that she's written there in her neat little hand means Nottingham Girls High School. That's where my mother went to school, and a place she really loved and spoke of so fondly all of her adult life. So here we have the book. It's very tired, but it's very precious, and so I've always kept it. Wherever I've lived, this book has gone with me, and often I've read stories from this to my children. So let's have a look. Very Young Verses by A. Milne with 73 illustrations by E.H. Shepherd. This is the 4th edition, and it was published by Methuen & Co., 36 Essex Street, London. You can see that this is the 4th edition, so it was printed in 1934. So my mother would have been given this when she was perhaps 2 years old. Mum has written some things in the front cover here, including little sections from stories that I remember and poems that I remember her reading. I'm going to read this one because Mum's taken the time to write it for us. I often think it must be fun to be the policeman tall, who stands where all the traffic goes, and never minds at all. He stands so very still while people hurry, and even when big lorries come, he never seems to worry. His uniform is made of blue, with buttons all a-shine. I think I like his helmet best and wish it could be mine. I really can be very kind, or he really can be very kind, although he looks so grand. For when I cross the road each day, he lets me hold his hand. Phyllis Pierce. And then one by Lewis Brettle. The sheep go baa, and the cows go moo. The little duck quacked and waddled off too. What was the matter? Why, I declare, a tiny little puppy dog was standing there. So let's have a look at these verses by A. Milne. Okay, so on the contents page, I'm going to share with you these particular verses. I'm not sure I should read them all out because I don't know whether we'll get through the whole book in a relatable length of video. But let's start and see where we go with these verses from A. Milne from many moons ago. And if we remind ourselves, 1934. The author to his reader. These verses are taken from 2 books of mine called When We Were Very Young and Now We Are 6. Perhaps you will write a book yourself one day, or will want to write a book. And you will find that before you can write a book about a little boy or an old woman or a prince, you must know what little boys or old women or princes say and do and think about, so that you can tell us in your book. Suppose you think of a story about a prince who gets lost when he is out hunting, and he suddenly finds a little cottage in a wood where an old woman lives, and he goes in and he talks to the old woman and plays games with her little grandson who lives with her. While your story is going on, the prince must behave as a prince would behave if he were lost in a wood, which isn't the way in which you or I would behave. And the old woman must talk as old women do talk, and not as young girls talk. And the little boy must play the sort of games which a little boy does play. Now, if it is a man who writes this story, then he was a little boy himself once, so he will remember how he played years ago. And if he has ever met an old woman or lived in a house with one, as most of us have, he will have noticed how old women talk. But if, as is probable, he has never seen a prince or been a prince, then he must imagine, that is, make up for himself, the way in which he thinks a prince would behave. Now, these are the three things in which a writer knows about people: by remembering, by noticing, and by imagining. Most of these verses you will find are about a little boy. I have a little boy of my own, and he was very young, 3, when I began to write these verses. So I called the first book When We Were Very Young. And then 3 years later, when I wrote another one, I called it Now We Are 6. Some of the things in these books were things I remembered doing myself years and years ago, and some were things I had noticed this little boy doing, and some were things which I imagined other children doing, although I hadn't seen them at it. And when I wrote about kings and queens, as you will see that I have, I tried to write about them as this little boy, Christopher Robin, would think about them. So it is really as if Robin would think about them. So it is really as if all the time he had been telling me what to say and I had been writing it down in verse for him. Now, I must just say something about verses and poetry, and then you can get on with the book. I expect you have danced sometimes or seen other people dancing, and you know that when you dance, you have to keep time to the music. Even if there is no music playing, you can hum a tune to yourself as you dance, without anybody hearing, and keep time to that. Now, you know, of course, that verses have rhymes in them, but even more important than the rhymes is what is called the rhythm. It is a difficult-looking word, but what it means is just the time that the verse keeps. Every piece of poetry has a music of its own, which it is humming to itself as it goes along, and every line, every word in it, has to keep time to this music. This is what makes it difficult to write poetry, because you can't just use any words. In any order, as long as it's sense and grammar, but you have to use particular words in a particular order so that they keep time to the music and rhyme when you want them to. If you can find words which keep time to the music and which are just the words for what you want to say, then the verses which you write are verses which sing themselves into people's heads and stay there forever, so that even when they are alone and unhappy, they have this music with them for company. So if you like learning these verses and find them easy to remember, I shall be very glad, because it will mean that I wrote them the right way. But if you don't, I shall be very sorry. A. Milne, March 1929. Happiness. John had a great big waterproof boots on. John had a great big waterproof hat. John had a great big waterproof mackintosh, and that, said John, is that. The Four Friends. Ernest was an elephant, a great big fellow. Leonard was a lion with a 6-foot tail. George was a goat, and his beard was yellow, and James was a very small snail. Leonard had a stall, and a great big strong one. Ernest had a manger, and its walls were thick. George found a pen, but I think it was the wrong one, and James sat down on a brick. Ernest started trumpeting and cracked his manger. Leonard started roaring and shivered his stall. James gave the huffle of a snail in danger, and nobody heard him at all. Ernest started trumpeting and raised such a rumpus. Leonard started roaring with the goat's new compass, and he reached the end of a brick. Ernest was an elephant and very well intentioned. Leonard was a lion with a brave new tail. George was a goat, as I think I have mentioned, but James was only a snail. The Little Black Hen. Berryman and Baxter, Pretty Boy and Penn, and old Farmer Middleton, all 5 big men, and all of them were after the Little Black Hen. She ran quickly, they ran fast. Baxter was first, and Berryman was last. I sat and watched by the old plum tree. She squawked through the hedge, and she came to me. The Little Black Hen said, "Oh, it's you." I said, "Thank you, how do you do? And please will you tell me, Little Black Hen, what did they want, those 5 big men?" The Little Black Hen, she said to me, "They want me to lay them an egg for tea. If they were emperors, if they were kings, I'm much too busy to lay them things." I'm not a king, and I haven't a crown. I climb up trees and I tumble down. I can shut one eye, I can count to 10. So lay me an egg, please, Little Black Hen. The Little Black Hen said, "What will you pay if I lay you an egg for Easter Day?" "I'll give you a please and a how do you do. I'll show you the bear who lives in the zoo. I'll show you the nettle place on my leg, if you'll lay me a great big Eastery egg." The Little Black Hen said, "I don't care for a how do you do or a big brown bear, but I'll lay you a beautiful Eastery egg if you'll show me the nettle place on your leg." I showed her the place where I had my sting. She touched it gently with one black wing. "Nettles don't hurt if you count to 10. And now for the egg," said the Little Black Hen. "When I wake up on Easter Day, I shall see my egg she's promised to lay. If I were emperors, if I were kings, it couldn't be fuller of wonderful things. Berryman and Baxter, Pretty Boy and Penn, and old Farmer Middleton, all 5 big men, all of them are waiting an egg for their tea. But the Little Black Hen is much too busy. The Little Black Hen is much too busy. The Little Black Hen is much too busy. She's laying my egg for me." Here's a beautiful one that I remember very clearly from my childhood, before nursery school and before primary school. I'm just going to pour myself a coffee just to be able to speak more easily as I read to you. Oh, thank you. That's good. Buckingham Palace. Let's have a look. I seem to remember quite a few of the verses from this one. Yes. "They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Alice is marrying one of the guard. A soldier's life is terribly hard," says Alice. "They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We saw a guard in a sentry box. One of the sergeants looks after their socks," says Alice. "They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. We looked for the king, but he never came. Well, God take care of him all the same," said Alice. "They're changing guard at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. They've great big parties inside the grounds. I wouldn't be king for £100, says Alice. They're changing guards at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. A face looked out, but it wasn't the king's. He's much too busy assigning things, says Alice. They're changing guards at Buckingham Palace. Christopher Robin went down with Alice. Do you think the king knows all about me? Sure to, dear, but it's time for tea, says Alice. King John's Christmas. Let's see what this will give us as we read. Yes. King John's Christmas. King John was not a good man. He had his little ways, and sometimes no one spoke to him for days and days and days. And men who came across him when walking in the town gave him a supercilious stare, or passed with noses in the air, and bad King John stood dumbly there, blushing beneath his crown. King John was not a good man, and no good friends had he. He stayed in every afternoon, but no one came to tea. And round about December, the cards upon his shelf, which wished him lots of Christmas cheer and fortune in the coming year, were never from his near and dear, but only from himself. King John was not a good man, yet had his hopes and fears. They'd given him no present now for years and years and years. But every year at Christmas, while minstrels stood about, collecting tribute from the young, for all the songs they might have sung, he stole away upstairs and hung a hopeful stocking out. King John was not a good man, and he lived his life aloof. Alone he thought a message out while climbing up the roof. He wrote it down and propped it against the chimney stack. To all and sundry, near and far, Father Christmas in particular, and signed it not Johannes R., but very humbly Jack. I want some crackers, and I want some candy. I think a box of chocolates would come in handy. I don't mind oranges, I do like nuts, and I should like a pocket knife that really cuts. And oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball. King John was not a good man. He wrote this message out and gat him to his room again, descending by the spout. And all night he lay there, a prey to hopes and fears. I think that's him a-coming now. Anxiety bedewed his brow. He'll bring one present anyhow, the first I've had for years. Forget about the crackers and forget about the candy. I'm sure a box of chocolates would never come in handy. I don't like oranges. I don't want nuts. And I have got a pocket knife that almost cuts. But oh, Father Christmas, if you love me at all, bring me a big red India rubber ball. King John was not a good man. Next morning, when the sun rose up to tell a waiting world that Christmas had begun, and people seized their stockings and opened them with glee, and crackers, toys, and games appeared, and lips with sticky sweets were smeared, King John said grimly, as I feared, nothing again for me. I did want crackers, and I did want candy. I know a box of chocolates would come in handy. I do love oranges, and I did want nuts. I haven't got a pocket knife, not one that cuts. And oh, if Father Christmas had loved me at all, he would have brought a big red India rubber ball. King John stood by the window and frowned to see below the happy bands of boys and girls all playing in the snow. A while he stood there watching and envying them all, when through the window, big and red, there hurtled by his royal head, and bounced and fell upon the bed, an India rubber ball. And oh, Father Christmas, my blessings on you fall, for bringing him a big red India rubber ball. I do love that song, that verse. Daffadowndilly. She wore her yellow sunbonnet, she wore her greenest gown, she turned to the south wind and curtsied up and down. She turned to the sunlight and shook her yellow head and whispered to her neighbour, winter is dead. Rice pudding. What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's crying with all her might and main. She won't eat her dinner. Rice pudding again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her dolls and a daisy chain and a book about animals, all in vain. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well and she hasn't a pain, but look at her. Now she's beginning again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? I've promised her sweets and a ride in the train, and I've begged her to stop for a bit and explain. What is the matter with Mary Jane? What is the matter with Mary Jane? She's perfectly well, and she hasn't a pain, and it's lovely rice pudding for dinner again. What is the matter with Mary Jane? Teddy Bear. A bear, however hard he tries, grows tubby without exercise. Our teddy bear is short and fat, which is not to be wondered at. He gets what exercise he can by falling off the ottoman, but generally seems to lack the energy to clamber back. Now, tubbiness is just the thing which gets a fellow wondering, and Teddy worried lots about the fact that he was rather stout. He thought, if only I were thin. But how does anyone begin? He thought, it really isn't fair to grudge me exercise and air. For many weeks he pressed in vain his nose against the window pane, and envied those who walked about, reducing their unwonted stout. None of the people he could see is quite, he said, as fat as me. Then, with a still more moving sigh, I mean, he said, as fat as I. Now, Teddy, as was only right, slept in the ottoman at night, and with him crowded in as well more animals than I can tell. Not only these, but books and things, such as a kind relation brings, old tales of once upon a time, and history retold in rhyme. One night it happened that he took a peep at an old picture book, wherein he came across by chance the picture of a king of France, a stoutish man, and down below these words, King Louis so-and-so, nicknamed the Handsome. There he sat, and think of it, the man was fat. Our bear rejoiced like anything to read about this famous king, nicknamed the Handsome. There he sat, and certainly the man was fat, nicknamed the Handsome. Not a doubt, the man was definitely stout. Why, then, a bear, for all his tub, might yet be named the handsome cub. Might yet be named, or did he mean that years ago he might have been? For now he felt a slight misgiving. Is Louis so-and-so still living? Fashions in beauty have a way of altering from day to day. Is handsome Louis with us yet? Unfortunately, I forget. Next morning, nose to window pane, the doubt occurred to him again. One question hammered in his head, is he alive or is he dead? Thus, nose to pane, he pondered, but the lattice window, loosely shut, swung open. With one startled, "Oh!" our Teddy disappeared below. There happened to be passing by a plump man with a twinkling eye, who, seeing Teddy in the street, raised him politely to his feet and murmured kindly in his ear soft words of comfort and of cheer. Well, well, allow me. Not at all. Tut, tut, a very nasty fall. Our Teddy answered not a word. It's doubtful if he even heard. Our bear could only look and look. The stout man in the picture book, that handsome king, could this be he? This man of adiposity? Impossible, he thought, but still, no harm in asking. Yes, I will. Are you, he said, by any chance, His Majesty, the King of France? The other answered, I am that, bowed stiffly, and removed his hat. Then said, excuse me, with an air, but is it Mr. Edward Bear? And Teddy, bending very low, replied politely, even so. They stood beneath the window there, the king and Mr. Edward Bear, and handsome, if a trifle fat, talked carelessly of this and that, Then said his Majesty, "Well, well, I must get on," and rang the bell. "Your bear, I think," he smiled. "Good day," and turned and went upon his way. A bear, however hard he tries, grows tubby without exercise. Our teddy bear is short and fat, which is not to be wondered at. But do you think it worries him to know that he is far from slim? No, just the other way about. He's proud of being short and stout. Let me take another sip. I did love the humour of that one, with Teddy meeting His Majesty the King of France. The Good Little Girl. It's funny how they often say to me, "Jane, have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl?" And when they have said it again, they say it again. Have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? I go out to a party. I go out to tea. I go to an aunt for a week at the sea. I come back from school or from playing a game. Wherever I come from, it's always the same. Well, have you been a good girl, Jane? It's always the end of the loveliest day. Have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? I went to the zoo and they waited to say, "Have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl?" Well, what did they think that I went there to do, and why should I want to be bad at the zoo? And should I be likely to say if I had? So that's why it's funny of Mummy and Dad, this asking and asking in case I was bad. Well, have you been a good girl, Jane? The Three Foxes. Once upon a time there were 3 little foxes who didn't wear stockings and they didn't wear sockses, but they all had handkerchiefs to blow their nose, and they kept their handkerchiefs in cardboard boxes. They lived in the forest in 3 little houses, and they didn't wear coats and they didn't wear trousers. They ran through the woods on their little bare tootsies, and they played touch last with a family of mouses. They didn't go shopping in the high street shopses, but caught what they wanted in the woods and copses. They all went fishing, and they caught 3 wormses. They went out hunting, and they caught 3 whoopses. They went to a fair, and they all won prizes, 3 plum puddings and 3 mince pies. They rode on elephants and swang on swingses, and hit 3 coconuts at coconut cheeses. That's all I know of the 3 little foxes who kept their handkerchiefs in cardboard boxes. They lived in the forest in 3 little houses, but they didn't wear coats and they didn't wear trousers. And they didn't wear stockings and they didn't wear sockses. Twice times. There were 2 little bears who lived in a wood, and one of them was bad and the other was good. Good Bear learnt his twice times one, but Bad Bear left all his buttons undone. They lived in a tree when the weather was hot, and one of them was good and the other was not. Good Bear learnt his twice times two, but Bad Bear's thingamies were worn right through. They lived in a cave when the weather was cold, but they did and they didn't do what they were told. Good Bear learnt his twice times three, but Bad Bear never had his handkerchief. They lived in the wood with a kind old aunt. One said yes'm, and the other said shan't. Good Bear learnt his twice times four, but Bad Bear's nicketies were terribly tore. And then quite suddenly, just like us, one got better and the other got worse. Good Bear muddled his twice times three, but Bad Bear coughed in his handkerchief. Good Bear muddled his twice times two, but Bad Bear's thingamies looked like new. Good Bear muddled his twice times one, but Bad Bear never left his buttons undone. There may be a moral, though some say not. I think there's a moral, though I don't know what. But if one gets better as the other gets worse, these 2 little bears are just like us, for Christopher remembers up to twice times 10. But I keep forgetting where I've put my pen. So I've had to write this one in pencil. The King's breakfast. The King asked the Queen, and the Queen asked the dairymaid, could we have some butter for the royal slice of bread? The Queen asked the dairymaid said, certainly, I'll go and tell the cow now, before she goes to bed. The dairymaid, she curtsied, and went and told the Alderney, don't forget the butter for the royal slice of bread. The Alderney said sleepily, you better tell His Majesty that many people nowadays like marmalade instead. The dairymaid said fancy, and went to Her Majesty. She curtsied to the Queen, and she turned a little red. Excuse me, Your Majesty, for taking the liberty, but marmalade is tasty if it's very thickly spread. The Queen said, oh, and went to His Majesty. Talking of the butter for the royal slice of bread, many people think that marmalade is nicer. Would you like to try a little marmalade instead? The King said, bother, and then he said, oh, dearie me. The King sobbed, oh, dearie me, and went back to bed. Nobody, he whimpered, could call me a fussy man. I only want a little bit of butter for my bread. The Queen said, there, and went to the dairymaid. The dairymaid said, there, and went to the shed. The cow said, there, I didn't really mean it. Here's milk for his porringer and butter for his bread. The Queen took the butter and brought it to His Majesty. The King said, butter, eh? And bounced out of bed. Nobody, he said, as he kissed her tenderly. Nobody, he said, as he slid down the banisters. Nobody, my darling, would call me a fussy man, but I do like a bit of butter on my bread. Before tea. Emmeline has not been seen for more than a week. She slipped between the two tall trees at the end of the green. We all went after her. Emmeline! Emmeline, I didn't mean. I only said that your hands weren't clean. We went to the trees at the end of the green. But Emmeline was not to be seen. Emmeline came slipping between the two tall trees at the end of the green. We all ran up to her. Emmeline, where have you been? Where have you been? Why, it's more than a week. And Emmeline said, sillies, I went and saw the Queen. She says my hands are perfectly clean. Bad Sir Brian Botany. I don't know why my mum had put a little marker in this verse. Perhaps she had gone as a long retired lady to a little nursery group to read or to talk about her school days, decades and decades before. But she often carried books with her as she met people, and there was always a book of verse or a book of poetry. She was a huge collector of poetry books. There was also always a book of verse in her bag. So here we are. This is going to be called, or this is called, Bad Sir Brian Botany. I'm just going to check how many pages so that we have space in this recording to keep it for you. Let me put the watch in there as a little marker. Bad Sir Brian Botany. Sir Brian had a battle axe with great big knobs on. He went among the villagers and blipped them on the head. On Wednesday and on Saturday, but mostly on the latter day, he called at all the cottages, and this is what he said. I am Sir Brian, ting-a-ling. I am Sir Brian, rat-a-tat-tat. I am Sir Brian, as bold as a lion. Take that, and that, and that. Sir Brian had a pair of boots with great big spurs on, a fighting pair of which he was particularly fond. On Tuesday and on Friday, just to make the street look tidy, he'd collect the passing villagers and kick them in the pond. I am Sir Brian, splash. I am Sir Brian, splosh. I am Sir Brian, as bold as a lion. Is anyone else for a wash? Sir Brian woke one morning and he couldn't find his battle axe. He walked into the village in his second pair of boots. He'd gone 100 paces when the street was full of faces, and the villagers were round him with ironical salutes. You are Sir Brian, indeed. You are Sir Brian, dear, dear. You are Sir Brian, as bold as a lion. Delighted to meet you here. Sir Brian went a journey, and he found a lot of duckweed. They pulled him out and dried him, and they blipped him on the head. They took him by the breeches, and they hurled him into ditches, and they pushed him under waterfalls, and this is what they said. You are Sir Brian, don't laugh. You are Sir Brian, don't cry. You are Sir Brian, as bold as a lion. Sir Brian, the lion, goodbye. Sir Brian struggled home again and chopped up his battle-axe. Sir Brian took his fighting boots and threw them in the fire. He's quite a different person now he hasn't got his spurs on, and he goes around the village as B. Botany, Esquire. I am Sir Brian. Oh, no. I am Sir Brian. Who's he? I haven't got any title. I'm Botany, plain Mr. Botany B. I hope you're enjoying this little series of verses. I'm finding it very emotional, just reading these and thinking of my mother, sharing them with me when I was a tiny boy, and sometimes finding her at home reading these by the fire when I was a teenager as well. Sneezles. Christopher Robin had weasels and Sneezles. They bundled him into his bed. They gave him what goes with a cold in the nose and some more for a cold in the head. They wondered if weasels could turn into measles, if Sneezles would turn into mumps. They examined his chest for a rash and the rest of his body for swellings and lumps. They sent for some doctors in Sneezles and weasels to tell them what ought to be done. All sorts and conditions of famous physicians came hurrying around at a run. They all made a note of the state of his throat. They asked if he suffered from thirst. They asked if the Sneezles came after the weasels, or if the first Sneezle came first. They said, if you teasel a Sneezle, or weasel a measle, may easily grow. But humour or pleasel, the weasel or Sneezle, the measle will certainly go. They expounded the reasons for Sneezles and weasels, the manner of measles when new. They said if he freezes in draughts and in breezes, mefleezles may even ensue. Christopher Robin got up in the morning. The Sneezles had vanished away, and the look in his eye seemed to say to the sky, now, how to amuse them today. Cheeky Christopher Robin. Us two, wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh and me. Whatever I do, he wants to do. Where are you going today, says Pooh. Well, that's very odd, 'cause I was too. Let's go together, says Pooh. Says he, let's go together, says Pooh. What's twice 11, I said to Pooh. Twice what, said Pooh to me. I think it ought to be 22. Just what I think myself, said Pooh. It wasn't an easy sum to do, but that's what it is, said Pooh, said he. That's what it is, said Pooh. Let's look for dragons, I said to Pooh. Oh, yes, let's, said Pooh to me. We crossed the river and found a few. Yes, those are dragons, all right, said Pooh. As soon as I saw their beaks, I knew. That's what they are, said Pooh, said he. That's what they are, said Pooh. Let's frighten the dragons, I said to Pooh. That's right, said Pooh to me. I'm not afraid, I said to Pooh, and I held his paw, and I shouted, shoo, silly old dragons, and off they flew. I wasn't afraid, said Pooh, said he. I'm never afraid with you. So wherever I am, there's always Pooh. There's always Pooh and me. What would I do, I said to Pooh, if it wasn't for you? And Pooh said, true, it isn't much fun for one, but two can stick together, says Pooh, says he. That's how it is, says Pooh. The Old Sailor. There was once an old sailor, my grandfather knew, who had so many things which he wanted to do that whatever he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't because of the state he was in. He was shipwrecked and lived on an island for weeks, and he wanted a hat, and he wanted some breeks, and he wanted some nets or a line and some hooks for the turtles and things which you read of in books. And thinking of this, he remembered a thing which he wanted for water, and that was a spring. and he thought that to talk to he'd look for and keep, if he found it, a goat or some chickens and sheep. Then, because of the weather, he wanted a hut, with a door to come in by, which opened and shut, with a jerk which was useful if snakes were about, and a very strong lock to keep savages out. He began on the fish hooks, and when he'd begun, he decided he couldn't because of the sun, so he knew what he ought to begin with, and that was to find or to make a large sun-stopping hat. A large sun-stopping hat. He was making the hat with some leaves from a tree when he thought, I'm as hot as a body can be, and I've nothing to take for my terrible thirst, so I'll look for a spring, and I'll look for it first. Then he thought, as he started, oh dear, and oh dear, I'll be lonely tomorrow with nobody here. So he made in his notebook a couple of notes. I must first find some chickens, and no, I mean goats. He had just seen a goat, which he knew by the shape, when he thought, I must have a boat for escape. But a boat means a sail, which means needles and thread, so I'd better sit down and make needles instead. He began on a needle, but thought as he worked that if this was an island where savages lurked, sitting safe in his hut he'd have nothing to fear, whereas now they might suddenly breathe in his ear. So he thought of his hut, and he thought of his boat, and his hat, and his breeks, and his chickens and goat, and the hooks for his food, and the spring for his thirst. But he never could think what he ought to do first. And so, in the end, he did nothing at all, but basked on the shingle wrapped up in a shawl. And I think it was dreadful the way he behaved. He did nothing but basking until he was saved. I'm glad I worked that out. This page was loose and I opened it the wrong way round. So let's look at this one now. The Dormouse and the Doctor. There once was a dormouse who lived in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red, and all the day long he'd a wonderful view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue. A doctor came hurrying round, and he said, Tut, tut, I'm sorry to find you in bed. Just say 99 while I look at your chest. Don't you find that chrysanthemums answer the best? The Dormouse looked round at the view and replied, when he said 99, that he'd tried and he'd tried, and the most answering things that he knew were geraniums red and delphiniums blue. The doctor stood frowning and shaking his head, and he took up his shiny silk hat as he said, What the patient requires is a change, and he went to see some chrysanthemum people in Kent. The Dormouse lay there, and he gazed at the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue, and he knew there was nothing he wanted instead of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor came back, and, to show what he meant, he had brought some chrysanthemum cuttings from Kent. Now, these, he remarked, give a much better view than geraniums red and delphiniums blue. They took out their spades and they dug up the bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. They planted chrysanthemums yellow and white. And now, said the doctor, we'll soon have you right. The Dormouse looked out and he said with a sigh, I suppose all these people know better than I. It was silly, perhaps, but I did like the view of geraniums red and delphiniums blue. The doctor came round and examined his chest and ordered him nourishment, tonics, and rest. How very effective, he said, as he shook the thermometer, all these chrysanthemums look. The Dormouse turned over to shut out the sight of the endless chrysanthemums, yellow and white. How lovely, he thought, to be back in a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor said, "Oh, tut, it's another attack," and ordered from him milk and massage of the back and freedom from worry and drives in a car, and murmured, "How sweet your chrysanthemums are." The Dormouse lay there with his paws to his eyes and imagined himself such a pleasant surprise. "I'll pretend," the chrysanthemums turned to a bed of delphiniums blue and geraniums red. The doctor next morning was rubbing his hands and saying, "There's nobody quite understands these cases as I do. The cure has begun. How fresh the chrysanthemums look in the sun." The Dormouse lay happy. His eyes were so tight. He could see no chrysanthemums, yellow or white, and all that he felt at the back of his head were delphiniums blue and geraniums red. And that is the reason, Aunt Emily said, if a dormouse gets in a chrysanthemum bed, you will find, so Aunt Emily says, that he lies fast asleep on his front with his paws to his eyes. The friend. There are lots and lots of people who are always asking things, like dates and pounds and ounces and the names of funny kings, and if the answer's either sixpence or 100 inches long, and I know they'll think me silly if I get the answer wrong. So Pooh and I go whispering, and Pooh looks very bright and says, "Well, I say sixpence, but I don't suppose I'm right." And then it doesn't matter what the answer ought to be, because if he's right, I'm right, and if he's wrong, it isn't me. The engineer. Let it rain, who cares? I've a train upstairs with a brake which I make from a string sort of thing, which works in jerks, because it drops in the spring, which stops with the string. All the wheels all stick, so quick that it feels like a thing that you make with a brake, not string. So that's what I make when the day's all wet. It's a good sort of brake, but it hasn't worked yet. Disobedience. James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of town if you don't go down with me." James Morrison's mother put on a golden down. James Morrison's mother drove to the end of town. James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, "I can get right down to the end of town and be back in time for tea." King John put up a notice. "Lost or stolen or strayed. James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord. She tried to get down to the end of the town. 40 shillings reward." James Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relatives not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of town without consulting me." James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King John said he was sorry, so did the Queen and the Prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, "If people go down to the end of town, well, what can anyone do?" And now then, very softly, J. M. W. G. Dupree took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. J. said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." And that, my friends, is a lengthy reading of a very special book from my childhood, which I am very fond of, and I hope you could tell that as I shared it with you. Thanks for watching, and thanks for listening.